Hello, angels and cherubs. I'm starting this video over again. I won't even... Okay, so here we are. I'm going to start all over again. I did this video and then partway through I discovered I wasn't even recording. Whatever. I'm doing a book review. It's called The Seventh Sense. And at this point, I think I'm giddy. Okay. So, The Seventh Sense, which I had laid out a few books that I was going to be doing over the course of the summer. And so I'm into my second of 3 books. And this is it. Finally doing it. I was sick for a while, and then I went on a summer vacation with my girls. And I'm finally here. So, this book is absolutely fantastic. It's probably one of my favorite ones because it opens doors, because it really unifies, it merges all of the psychic woo-woo type of spiritual stuff that I love, and which tends to be very qualitative, and it merges it with what is scientific and quantifiable and useful and applicable in our real world to solve problems, which to me is absolutely invaluable. So I will talk about my understanding of this book. If I get some things wrong, I do apologize. But you can correct what's wrong by reading the book yourself, which I highly recommend. Also, we tend to have a few different reactions in the face of looking at what's psychic, what is possibly not quantifiable, by saying either of two things. We say, I believe this, and I want to know more, or I don't believe this, and I'm going to say rude things in the comments below, in which case I'm telling you straight off, if you don't like what you're hearing, just take your finger, put it on your mouse, and find another channel. Exercises. Enough finger exercises. The Seventh Sense, the secrets of remote viewing as told by a quote-unquote psychic spy for the U.S. military by Lyn Buchanan. This is a joy to read. He has a sense of humor which is very dry and sarcastic at times that I relate to in a very big way. Love it. Also, he recounts the experiences he had, some experiences as a younger person, as a child, I think also, but definitely as a teen. There's one situation with a young girl. He was demonstrating a skill that he had developed and was aware of that he could do as they were walking on a sidewalk, and then at a later time some older religious people came along and wanted to banish the devil from him and that sort of nonsense. So he talks about his experiences in wanting to kind of cover up his psychic ability or his sensitivity. I relate to that psychicness by calling it sensitivity. I tend to be very sensitive to a lot of nonverbals. I connect with people and their nonverbals, and I call it sensitivity. But the more I read over the years, I think there are a number of words to explain these senses that we have. And I think he's calling his own a psychic ability. So he talks about his youth in that way. He also talks about his experience in the military. And that's when it gets so delicious, because I think one of the initial experiences he recounts is he's in front of a computer and somebody had kind of upset him and was standing at the doorway. and he got really angry in a moment as he was in front of a computer system now, not just a laptop, but we're talking years ago in front of a large sort of computer system as he's working as a sergeant in the military. So it's connected to a lot of their sensitive information. And by being angry, there's a certain energy or a surge of whatever that went into the computer system and blew out the computer system for kilometers, not only just in the building, but for a large area. And there was obviously an investigation to that, and they traced it back to him. So he got called into an office of a superior, and there was a look given to him. He says, "Whatever happens, soldier," the look that Lyn Buchanan was receiving said, "Whatever happens, soldier, your name is on my shit list in black permanent ink." Now that's an example of his humor as he's recounting his experience going through, I'm in trouble now. I wonder what happened. The drill sergeant, added with a deadly monotone voice, asked, "Did you kill my field station with your mind?" And later Lyn said, "Yes, sir, I did." Then the sergeant said, "Right effing on." So I don't really want to put expletives on my channel as much as possible, but I love the way that he describes the situation. So as a result, he then got put into this training that had already been going on since 1969-ish, I guess, as far as I can tell, for controlled remote viewing. So he describes how he was brought to this old building. It almost seems like a haunted scene in a work of fiction. But if this book could have been fiction, it couldn't have been written better because the narrative is delicious. He describes going into this building on an evening, and it was kind of dilapidated looking on the outside, but once he got inside, it was quite different, and everybody there was working on their training for controlled remote viewing, so which is CRV. I'll call it CRV just to kind of be brief about it. That's the acronym. So then he went on to this training, and yeah, that is really fascinating that there is training that is available. It's been decades now where people in the civilian world are working on their own belief systems. It's limited to being lumped into what's called a belief system, whether you believe in psychic abilities or not, to tap into the spiritual world, people who have died, knowing what the future is, or whatever it is that you sense. But here, it's being put to something that is quantifiable, qualitative, and useful in the sense that for government, for military purposes, you're looking into reading documents abroad, which they do only when it's absolutely necessary because of the work that is involved for reading detailed information like that. They're also finding enemy in caverns, and I will also show you a link below to some references for this sort of information. They're describing through CRV things that are underground or are hidden from satellite view that you would not be able to know it otherwise, but the remote viewing is being done by sitting in a room with a table and some pens and some paper, and you're sitting across from somebody else who also has a level of training, who's the monitor, and you are the viewer, and you receive an envelope with coordinates, sort of a number. This is what we want to know. It's represented by a number, and then you start doing this description in writing. And there's a sort of a template to follow, a formula to follow this technique. And you're in one room, in one part of the planet, and you are reading information or describing a location at a different place. A place that is unknown to you, a place that is unknown to the person sitting across from you at the table, the monitor. And you were not kind of naming the location, but you were giving descriptions of, you know, water or metal or sandy or descriptions. And there's a very specific training. I don't qualify to give the instruction in this video, but I'm giving you a description of what it is that I know about it. So by giving these descriptions and these qualitative adjectives, these words, and following this template, at the end there's a certain summary that the viewer will be able to, you know, you summarize what it is that you're describing. That description, done by somebody who's been trained, somebody who has honed this skill, much like what he calls a martial art. It's something that requires practice. Can be quite accurate. So accurate that it's being used by, or has been used by, the military. Now, at the time, several years ago, it was classified information. It was top secret. But they had to do what they call the dog and pony show. They had to sort of prove their skill, their worth as a unit, as a remote viewing unit. They had to prove to people who would fund this every year. And every year they got the funding because they did things that were quite impressive. At times they didn't have the feedback directly after having done some remote viewing, but they kept on having people come in and ask them to do more and more and more every day. So obviously, they're getting something out of it, because otherwise they wouldn't be coming back to get more remote viewing. I mean, the military's paying for this, right? So the book is worth reading because he goes into specifics about these things, about the situations that were on a world stage, the situations, what was going on behind the scenes to solve problems that were going on, to find people who needed to be found. In a civilian sense, to be practical in a civilian world, these skills that he's talking about can be used to find missing children. They can be used to, well, he doesn't talk about the show called Sensing Murder, but I'm making a connection to episodes of Sensing Murder where people who use remote viewing, people who use their psychic skills are able to help find the persons responsible for murders, even in cold cases. So being able to hone these skills and to be open to the possibility of these skills being something quite real and something quite useful in our world. Being open to it is very important. Being skeptical is useful because you don't want to just gobble everything up. That would be a waste of time, just to be gullible. But being cynical, not skeptic, but being cynical, saying, all of this, I'm closed to it, it's not useful, that being a cynic is not useful at all, because you are not open to the possibility of things that are being done, things that are very useful, helpful to humanity, these psychic skills. And by being closed, it sort of relegates the responsibility of research to people who are open to it. Then, when these skills have been developed to a degree where it's useful to the average person or to many people, and then we can find missing people, and we can make the world a better place because of these psychic skills. Then the cynics will say, oh, okay, now we believe. But they've been useless the whole time, right? So what I'm saying is, in looking at this video, do some research, read, be open to the possibility of developing skills, that tapping into the matrix, tapping into the God, if you want to call it God, tapping into whatever it is that allows you to get into your psychic sense, into that woo-woo that connects you to other people. Yeah, be open to learning about things that you have not been open to. So he talked about Pat Price and Ingo Swann, who performed with these skills to a very high degree. Oh, and Hal Puthoff. Hal being Harold, but they called him Hal Puthoff. So all of these people have written books. Pat Price, Ingo Swann, Hal Puthoff, Major Ed Dames is another one you might want to read. Books by him, although his books are quite pricey. And so are those from Ingo Swann, who has since passed away. So if you want to know more about this information and the experiences, they each recount their own version of what Lyn Buchanan talks about. So there's some crossover, obviously, in information. And it would help you as a reader to see the overlap in information, but it also helps you to deepen your knowledge if you read all of their books. So Ingo Swann was the person who was I guess you could call him the father of controlled remote viewing. He's the one he was an artist, and he was very developed in his psychic ability. The military hired him to develop this template. So Ingo Swann is the father of controlled remote viewing. He's the one who developed the template, the training manual, I guess, so to speak, through which other people can then learn how to use their skills. I guess you need to have a bit of a standardized, that's the word I'm looking for. It's a standardized approach to using your psychic abilities. That's how I would describe CRV, controlled remote viewing. Because everyone who is psychic, everyone has psychic skills, but everyone will develop them differently. Nothing really has been standardized per se that I see until the CRV technique has been printed up. So obviously for military purposes, you're going to have a standardized approach so that you can come up with, at the end of the day, a summary. What is it we're looking for? Where is it we need to go? So describe XYZ. These are your coordinates. This is a coordinate is like a set of numbers that describes the location that needs to be found, or to describe what is at that location. The coordinates is a number representation of the target to be described by the remote viewer. So while they're doing these, what they call dog and pony shows, to prove themselves, to get the funding every year, there's this one situation that Lyn Buchanan describes. There's a man who walks in and he wants to observe this CRV as it's happening. And all he sees through this glass into this other room is a couple of guys talking. They have paper on a table and they're just talking for a couple of hours. And he says, "Oh, I'm very underwhelmed by what I'm seeing. I thought I was going to see some, some psychic, something dazzling," and he's underwhelmed. And he said, so he was told, okay, your coordinates, your description of your target, the remote viewers get the coordinates. The guy who came in who had to be impressed, he had an envelope that he didn't know what was in the envelope. It was prepared for him. He walked in. It was in his briefcase. And the task was that the viewers had to describe what was in that envelope. So when he says he's underwhelmed, he was told, open your target envelope and read the summary and judge. So read the summary of what the guys were describing on paper in that room. Now you have the summary. Now you have the envelope with the target information. So it says, and judge our work for yourself. That will tell you what we really do and who we really are. So the senator took the still sealed envelope out of his briefcase and opened it. Later on, he says, damn. He kept saying, damn, damn. So he was comparing the summary with the picture that was in the envelope. And apparently it was impressive because he couldn't stop saying damn. So the project was funded for another year and would eventually be called another name. So the project kept on going through a series of other names. Stargate and Sunstreak and whatever. So that's how they would get their funding, is by doing proof of what they did every year. Then we're at 21 minutes now, and this is only chapter 4, so I'm going to try and skip through a few things. He does talk about real life situations. Padua, Italy. Tehran, Iran. William Buckley. Colonel Rich Higgins. Chernobyl, which was, that was a cool story. They had to predict what was going to show up in the newspaper on a given, what was it, a Friday or something? And so the description was done. They did the remote viewing and came up with a description of what's going to happen in the following Friday, for instance. And they described basically the massive meltdown of a nuclear power plant. But it didn't score because it was in the newspaper on the previous Friday, and not, the target was actually on a particular Friday, and because it was on a different Friday in the newspaper, anyways. But that's where you get into, okay, maybe it missed the mark on a quantitative level, but qualitatively, that's pretty impressive. So that's really exciting to me, because here we have a description of things that are going on behind the scenes and what actually happens. And it's encouraging to me because I certainly use this information in my own personal life, and I try and develop my own skills. And just last weekend, this is an aside from the book, obviously, but just last weekend, I was talking about CRV because I was getting ready to do this video, and we were at the dinner table, and we were recounting some of the things that, some of the exercises myself and my 2 very young daughters have done over the years that were successful and pretty cool. And so there was some people in the family who were there, and who were like, okay, go ahead, show us what you got, because he's, I think he's a healthy kind of skeptic, not necessarily cynical, but cynical, but he's, well, maybe he's cynical. He's not a believer. Okay. So, but it was an exercise we did at the table. My young daughter decided to draw a picture that I couldn't see, and I was going to try and write down information there. Now, having done this and trying to guess what was on that paper, I know that there's a ton of information that's being downloaded into my mind. I pick up on the things that people are thinking and saying and doing at the table. The TV is going and had to be off, so I turned that off. And just being able to focus is, there's a whole mental process that's involved. But I did end up in the description saying long legs and vehicle-like. Now, in the moment when I was writing those things, I knew I should have drawn a picture of what I meant by vehicle-like. So I was saying hard, and I should have, oh, can you see this? I should have drawn that in my picture, but I didn't. And I really fought with it because I wanted to do some kind of, you know, oh God, I can't draw very well, but that sort of vehicle-like thing. I wanted to draw that. And I talked myself out of it because I was saying, no, it has to be in a description. And what if it's wrong? And I second-guessed myself and I didn't do it. However, my daughter's picture ended up not being a vehicle at all. But it ended up being a turtle, a very nice turtle like that. So that's an example of how it was a total miss. And when I was trying to explain afterwards, oh, but you know, what was going through my mind was, no sell, not going to have. So it was a learning experience for me in that, yeah, you really can't just write down a column of words and be done with it and kind of see if it's a hit or a miss. You really have to go through the exercise and go through the exact descriptions and put everything you want, and then take the time to do it, remove the distractions, and come up with your summary and go through the techniques that are expected to get some kind of a result. So, am I impressed with my own ability? Hey, why shouldn't I be? It's for home use, and I'm cool with it. It's fun. I love doing this, and I'm not hurting anybody, so yeah, we have a lot of fun with it, myself and my girls. Anyway, back to the book. It was a miss because in describing this accurately, it did not show up on the right date. It was a week before. So he talks about missing fuel mystery. These are some of the headings that he has in his book. Lockerbie, Scotland, something that happened there. Key West, Florida, which if you look these things up, I mean, by the book, it's really, really, really worth looking at these psychic skills and how they were able to play on a world stage, documented on a world stage. So cool. So there's questions like, can you do evil with it? Of course you can do evil with it, but evil tends to be a really qualitative thing. He develops this, you know, it depends on whose team you're playing. So for instance, if they are doing a remote viewing, and I'm just going to paraphrase, not specifically from the book, but I'm going to give you the idea of what he's talking about. If he's in the U.S. and does a remote viewing to something on the other side of the, on a certain part of the planet, and that results in the military going in and bombing a threat. The threat is perceived as a threat by the U.S. military, for instance. But those people that are being bombed, there may be some, a mother, a wife, they might see it as evil, whereas people on this side of the planet might say, no, we're doing what needs to be done and it's not evil. So evil is a perception. And so can these skills be used for evil, for harming others unnecessarily? That's not a conversation I am going to be talking about here, because it's just so broad. It really deserves some discussion. But what needs to happen is a sense of ethics. When you're developing these skills, ethics is really important, and that's something that comes across in his writing as well. So I really appreciate where he's coming from. Let's see, what else can I say? Okay, so some of these reactions that he gets, that Lyn Buchanan gets, the author, some of them are overwhelmingly enthusiastic and supportive, he says, and some of them he gets death threats. So can you imagine when you are honing these skills, when you're developing these skills, and he's actually become a teacher of remote viewing. He's been accused of causing cancer and killing the family, I don't know, whatever, dog or whatever. He gets accusations for things that he doesn't do because, you know, people are afraid of the unknown. He says, callers have blamed me for causing cancer, herpes, crooked feet, and ruined marital relationships. Okay. The purpose of this is so much bigger than somebody's case of herpes, you know. This is not witchcraft, although people who practice witchcraft can certainly use this. That's not what he's doing. He also talks about how almost every country uses some form of psychic spying. That in and of itself is pretty interesting because that means that the skill is pervasive, it's acknowledged, it is used, it is funded, it is global, and yet there's a healthy amount of skepticism about it, but it is something that is very real and useful. He talks about the civilian applications. He talks about how CRV requires a lot of dedication and discipline, like a martial art. It requires practice, and it takes years to achieve a certain level of proficiency. He also says that one of the strengths of CRV is that it gives the viewer total control over his session. The other thing that he mentions, he talks about, is that there are no more secrets, that we all have the ability to get information that is unknown on the surface, but we all have the ability to tap into it. However, with CRV, it leaves no trace. So what I mean by that is that when you are going, not physically going, but when your mind, your spirit, your whatever this is, your sense is going to another location and viewing what is there. You can sit up on a rock and have your perspective that way. You can sit up at a different location and look at it from a different angle. But no matter how it is that you're looking at the target location, you are not being detected by anybody there. So other remote viewers would not be able to see that you're actually viewing that location, which is a strength. With CRV, you're not being detected, which is a strength, because then if nobody knows that you are viewing what is going on, what is meant to be kept secret, then they're not likely to change their plans. He says it here, the military use CRV as its main viewing method for many reasons, but the main one is that we could go in, get the information, get out, and leave absolutely no trace behind. People at the target side would never know that their security had been breached and would therefore never feel the need to change their plans. With other methods, targeted people sometimes feel a psychic presence or feel like they're being watched. Have you ever felt like you've been being watched? It's very woo-woo in that you could, talk about paranoia. But anyway. Animals are sometimes alerted, which in turn alerts humans there. Not so with CRV. It's a whole mental exercise. That to me is quite exciting. Yeah, love this book. Love it, love it. Okay. Then he distinguishes the senses. Why he called this book The Seventh Sense is because we usually talk about our five senses. Those that are associated with organs. So hearing and vision and olfaction and taste and touch. So those are your 5 senses. People will talk about the 6th sense as being a psychic sense. But what he's saying is, no, your psychic sense is a 7th sense. That is what he's developing in this book. Your 6th sense comes before. It's the ambiance. The ambiance is predictable, dependable, and repeatable. So even though it's not associated with an organ, your 6th sense is the ambiance, and it is a sense with which we are all familiar. He gives an example. Yeah, he talks about when you're training for CRV, you look at the fact that you have 2 brand new senses, your 6th and your 7th. So if you can picture yourself on top of a cliff, right there at the edge, picture that, and you get the feeling of, whoa, like impending danger, or that feeling, that ambiance, that is a sense. So if you put anybody at the edge of the cliff, they will have that sense of impending doom, or a knife all over, or that pull, or that feeling, however you describe it. If you picture yourself, or you put a person in a cathedral where it's large, and I would describe it as comforting and holy and peaceful and embracing and calm and non-threatening, that sort of ambiance, that feeling of being in a cathedral, that sense, you're picking that up. It's a different sense of being in a cathedral. It's different from the feeling you would get on top of a cliff. That is ambiance. That is your 6th sense when you're tapping into that feeling. Your 7th sense is getting information that is elsewhere. And in the links that I will put below, he himself is talking about his book and the pertinent, salient features. So he's going to do it justice a lot more than I will. So, yeah, the remainder of the book goes a lot more into how to do remote viewing, but it's not an instruction. It doesn't take place of the training that you would require to be able to do this well. What I want to convey to my witchy friends, there's something specific here where he talks about the ball of white light. This made a connection for me that I had one of those aha moments, because it's not just an imagination. When you, as a witch or as a Wiccan, you protect yourself with a white light so that nothing can harm you. It's a visual sort of imagery that you do to protect yourself psychically. It's a practice that many Wiccans will do, many witches will do. He talks about that in this book, which tickled me so much. I love it. He says that he's seen those people within a white light that protect themselves. But what he says is that it's like a beacon, a ball of white light where you see them. He goes into his remote viewing and he sees these people protected within a white light, but it shows them exactly where they are, like a big bullseye, like a target. Oh, that's where they are. So they're not hidden at all because they're surrounding themselves with this white light. It's just, I would love to be able to see that. That is so cool. That is so, okay. So he talks about it as being, the white light as being a talisman. So when a person starts having faith in a talisman itself, it becomes just the opposite of what the person wants. They begin to feel that since they have this protector, they no longer need to be diligent or self-protective. Therefore, they let their natural and internal guards down and actually become easier to spy on psychically. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of let you know that that's out there. Let's see what else. Why CRV is powerful. your personal power. It is not at all unusual for a person who wants power over you to use some subliminal methods of convincing you that they already have that power. Let me convey this to you. This is worth reading because it speaks to our own personal power and in using our own psychic sense to protect ourselves. He talks about psychic attack. It is likely the result of fear and imagination on your part, being attacked psychically, and has nothing to do with anything someone else has done to you. Sure, it felt real. The illness was real. The bad luck, the incidents that started happening to you in your life were real. But the cause of those things had more to do with your own fear and imagination than with anything else, than anything or anyone else. So he's talking about being psychically attacked. You are responsible for your own reality. He goes on to say, it is not at all unusual for a person who wants power over you to use some subliminal methods of convincing you that they already have that power. He goes on to say, your own belief that it is your own belief that is causing the problems. So there's some personal development here that I really enjoyed out of this book as well, because you are developing your own awareness of what is of how you relate to other people and what kind of power other people have over you and don't have over you. He says that remote viewing is used only to obtain information about you or about things. It is not a tool for psychic attack. He does differentiate, however, there are different skills. I mean, they've been doing this for decades, right? So there's different skills. Controlled remote viewing is to view something elsewhere. There is something called controlled remote influencing, CRI, where you can have a certain amount of control over influencing something elsewhere with specialized training. And then he talks about controlled remote control, CRC. And he says that only at the time of the writing of this book, there were 2 people only who were trained to do that. And that is to actually implement some sort of change in, elsewhere through this skill, this psychic skill. And that the 2 people who were chosen at that point were chosen to be trained because of their Christian and their altruistic views. They would not be harmful. So he's comforting the reader in saying that people who are using these techniques are not interested in harming and bringing harm to someone else. We know now that there are people who are using what is called remote viewing, because CRV, controlled remote viewing, these terms are like registered terms with the people who've developed these techniques. The people who are remote viewers are taking these psychic techniques and putting their own spin to it. I'm not saying that they're more or less valid in what they do, valid in that they are doing what they purport to do and achieving the same amount of skill. But the thing is that they are not the techniques that are being taught by controlled remote viewers. It's different. And it has to do with like copyright or registered terms and that sort of thing. Psychic skills are pervasive around the world and always have been. So there will be different terms to describe the skills that other people develop. And so the people who are using terms like remote viewing are not using controlled remote viewing because that's a registered term, but they're sort of piggybacking on similar skills and making it their own so that they don't have to, go through the exact training and putting in the money into getting the training. Yeah, so it's kind of a political climate there. Oh, there's a term called doorknobbing. I mean, they've been doing this for such a long time that they even have phenomena that happen frequently enough and that have earned terms, like doorknobbing. So when you're remote viewing and you are you spend all of your time talking about this shiny metal, object, and you're not describing the actual target itself, that can be called doorknobbing, because you spend all your time describing the doorknob when the actual target was the door, right? So it is a whole training, a whole study that seems to be really fascinating. And I would love to be able to do it. Anyway, this book opens doors. He gives another example here. Expert remote viewer Joe McManigal. His books are also expensive. Ugh. But he, page 144 here, he was given a set of numbers. And just with that set of numbers, he was able to go into, view, not necessarily go into, but view, his subconscious viewed this place. And he described it as an upper floor consisted of small rooms where one-on-one business was conducted. Ground intelligence later discovered that the building was in fact a special brothel where military leaders discussed military plans downstairs while waiting for other activities upstairs. He goes on to describe how that was sort of like, because it's so known to that discipline, that military world, that viewing takes place, they have things that are put, so they're doing these military discussions on the main floor, right? And they don't want for remote viewers to come in and know what they're doing. So they put a distraction. So on the upper floor, they have this brothel, so that if a remote viewer comes, they'll see the brothel and see all the activities that they're doing and kind of be camouflage. It's a camouflage kind of, and not know what's going on the real sort of military business that's going on the main floor. But as Lyn Buchanan will explain, he says that people who are really skilled in what they're doing won't be dissuaded, or they won't be sort of fooled by the camouflage. They'll be able to see the actual information. Can you hear what I'm describing? Doesn't this sound like, if you were to write a work of fiction, you couldn't write it better than this. This is absolutely brilliant. I love this, that it's just delicious, isn't it? A whole, fascinating. Anyway, I've given you a good chunk of the book here, good description of kind of some of the highlights that I've seen in the first half of the book. The latter part of the book really talks about techniques and terminology and more examples that are fascinating. I can't recommend this book enough. Will it help you develop your psychic skills? It's not intended to. He says that in the beginning. He does give a lot of, sort of sheets in the back, worksheets in the back that describe remote viewing data worksheets and how to use it and how to do things. But this book is not intended to give you the training that you require. Hand in hand with this, I also sort of downloaded and printed quite some years ago something by the Stanford Research Institute International. It's got some coffee stains on it and stuff because it's well loved. Coordinate remote viewing training manual. So you can get, I got it free online, and it gives you examples for, about controlled remote viewing, and gives you a better understanding. Again, I don't think it's actually training you, but I think this is something that people use when they are training. So when you're doing your exercises at home, if this is something that is interesting to you, that's some reference material for you. For myself, I have a bag. I'm just going, if I pick it up, it's going to be a very noisy bag, so I'm not going to pick it up. But in that bag, I have, over the years, collected pictures. And I try not to look at them too much, but in my limited ability to train myself, I throw pictures from calendars, from postcards, from whatever, newspaper clips, whatever you get, and it goes into this bag. And then when I want to do a remote viewing session for fun training for myself, I will go in blindly, pick it out, put it in an envelope aside, and then try and describe what is in that envelope. So there's an idea for you if you like. Ideally, you might do other exercises that I try, which is like telling my sister or my daughter to put something on a very flat table where nothing else is on that table but this one thing, and then try and describe what that thing is. I have various levels of success doing that. There's always some success in doing that, sometimes better than others. Another thing that I've done is one of my daughters will draw a simple picture. Like at one time when I was starting out with this a few years ago, it was a star. And I still have that star, and I drew out the star. So that was a success, 100%, because it was so darn simple. But yeah, this is a fascinating discipline, and I'm so not interested in listening to cynics. I am more interested in, because it's useless. You know, when you say, I don't believe this, so grumble, grumble, grumble. How is that even useful? That's not useful. Great. I'm glad you have an opinion. You're entitled to your opinions. Everybody should have opinions. They're free. Have as many opinions as you want, no matter how erroneous. It doesn't matter. But for those who want to explore and research and do some mental exercises, this is really a fascinating discipline. And I wish, gosh, I'm 47 years old, and I don't, at this point, if I could be so skilled as to do this as a career, where I could find missing people, if I could find, murderers who are not able to be found by any other means, if I could develop those skills, wow, I really and really, really admire the people who are able to do that, who are on a world stage, who are looked at as resources to be able to do that. I wish I could do that. I admire them. I love reading their books when they put these skills into words and I'm able to read what they do for a living. That to me is just, I admire that so much. So I do have one more book on my summer reading list, and I left it upstairs. It is by Nancy Dutetra, and that'll be my next book review. Onward and upward, my angels and cherubs. I hope you've enjoyed this book review, and do buy this book. Read it. It's delicious. Can't say enough about it. Have a great summer.